It's time for part two of our Fixing the Sacramento Kings defense mini-series. And on today's show, the head coach of Sac State basketball and one of the assistants for the Australian FIBA World Cup team, David Patrick, joins me right here on Locked On Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily Sacramento Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time for another episode of Locked On Kings.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all offseason long. My name is Matt George. I have the privilege of being your host here. I'm a Sacramento sports reporter and producer for ABC 10 News. And over the last year or so, I've gotten to get to know David Patrick, the head coach of Sac State men's basketball. He came to Sacramento and took over Sac State at the same time Mike Brown came to Sacramento and took over the Sacramento Kings. And it's fitting that both of them have the relationship that they have. I mean, Mike and DP are familiar with each other. David has worked with a bunch of NBA names, from guys like Patty Mills to Josh Giddey to Ben Simmons. In the past. Like I said in the introduction, he's going to be in just a little bit here hopping on a plane and heading over to Australia to start practice, and then we'll be part of the FIBA World Cup team and on that bench working with that Australian national team. So, I mean, he's got an abundance of experience, and having him here in Sacramento, not just to work on the Sacramento State program and grow that program and build that program, but to be just a part of our Sacramento basketball culture, to be willing to come here on the Locked On Kings podcast and to become a friend of mine like he has over the last year. It's really a special treat. So to be able to get him to come here on the Locked On Kings podcast, even though he's not working directly with the Kings, he's familiar with the Kings. He's been to Kings training camp before, to get his 2 cents on what the Kings have to do to improve defensively and just to get his defensive philosophies as a coach, I think it's really, really cool. Plus, I highly encourage you to listen all the way through to the end of the interview, because we talk about the Sac State program a little bit at the end. And we spend a good amount of time talking about De'Aaron Fox working with Sac State, showing up at team practices, working with the guys. It gives you a really good glimpse into just who De'Aaron Fox is as a person, who he is as an ambassador for the game of basketball, and who he is as a competitor and maybe a future coach. Like, it's really, really cool what DP had to say about De'Aaron Fox working with the Sacramento State Hornets this offseason towards the end of the podcast. So listen to it all the way through, and hopefully you get a better understanding, as I did get a better understanding of what the Sacramento Kings have to do to improve as a defensive team. Part two of our Fixing the Sacramento Kings defense mini-series here on the Locked On Kings podcast. And we brought in the big guns, DP, David Patrick, the head coach of Sac State men's basketball, going into his second season there and just about to hop on a plane to go to Australia to be a part of the coaching staff of the Australian national team for the FIBA World Cup. So when I say we snatched some time, we really snatched it right before his clock is about to be thrown all the way off. DP, pleasure to talk to you, my friend. Pleasure to have you back here on Locked On Kings. We're going to be talking some defense and breaking down some defensive philosophies. So I wanted to start with this. In your mind, as a coach, what does it take to have a good defensive team or good defensive program?
Look, I think at any level, the game's changed so much as you want to take away threes, defend the three-point line, and defend the paint. So you're trying to take away threes early, defend the paint, and then obviously try to keep teams up the free throw line by not fouling. Now, all that is easier said than done a lot of times, because the games play like this and you got so many dynamic shooters and scorers. But I think for us, it's defend the three, guard the paint, and then guard without fouling. And if you do that, you give yourself in the half court a pretty good chance to win.
With just the skill level alone and the shot making alone at the NBA level, do you sometimes feel like you have to choose one or the other, like going all in to defend the three-point line versus go all in to defend the paint? Or do you imagine even there's a balance that can be found there?
I think there's a balance, but what ends up happening is when the game's played so fast, like the Kings play, or like teams are now trying to play around the world, is like your transition D has to be impeccable, right? You got to get back, stop layups early, then you got to close out and stop threes. And then when you take away the three, you got to guard. So there's three parts to it. So I think you got to do all three to be really good, to be elite. And when you look at the teams that were in the finals, Miami, Denver, you see those guys being able to do both. I think Miami was able to take their defense, even though they finished towards the bottom 8 of the Eastern Conference. Their defense traveled because they kind of have always laid their hat on the defensive end of the floor.
You know Mike Brown very well. For those who don't know, DP and Mike Brown have had a relationship for a long time. And I know you're very aware of what the Sacramento Kings team is doing. Do you feel that the Kings are, in terms of 3 levels of defense, 3-point, mid-range, and paint, do you think they're good at any 1 or 2 of those 3, and it's just the second or third that's holding them back? Or do you think all 3 levels need some sharpening?
Look, obviously year one for Mike, he obviously took the scoring to another level, the levels we haven't seen before in the NBA. And I think in any situation, it's hard to get everything fixed in 1 year. And Mike has always been a defensive guy first. He has a great staff in Jordy and Luke and them on his sideline. So I think he's, at least for my little time that I've been at training camp, they've preached transition offense and playing with pace. With that, your transition defense comes into effect. I would think like any team that's trying to get to the next level, your half court defense needs to be more sound, whether that's more rim protection when Sabonis is out. Those type things I think can improve, and that probably improves with their roster buildup. But I like their length. I like their speed with Fox at the point. Obviously, he's the catalyst of their push on offense and their pressure ball on defense. And I think their wings will get better. They're a young team, who grows over time. It's just hard to get everything in year one, and I think they made impeccable strides. And I know Mike and the management has kind of built their roster to improve a little bit more in those other areas.
You and Mike Brown both came to Sacramento at the same time. You both inherited a roster, and you're trying to balance implementing your system with making sure you're putting something together that works for the team that's already here. Now, I mean, you're going into your second seasons. Mike is going into his second season, and in particular with the Sacramento Kings, one of the advantages that I felt to essentially bringing this core back and just adding kind of rotation pieces on top of it was you don't have to take any more time or that much time re-implementing or reteaching. It's basically, okay, we have a foundation. Now we can build upon it. In your opinion, with the practices that you run and with the training camps that Mike Brown and his staff is going to run, how much further ahead does that put this group, or how much of an advantage is that for Mike, who can come into training camp day one, maybe spend a few hours reviewing, and then everything else is new and preparation for adding the next layer to that cake?
Look, I think it's huge. Just the terminology, the language is different in year one. Now you come back, you got returners that know, what you call pick and roll or what you call a post up, which is different terms at different places. That's already in place. I think the drills that they do now, your veterans know what they are, whether it be Fox and Malik Monk and those guys, Kevin Herter, those guys returning, know what the drills are, and they can teach the new guys that are coming in what's going on, rather than you, the coach, having to be the voice, which takes time, and knowing what's important to the coaching staff in year two. When it's player-led, I think it helps so much more, and not, it takes time. And I think year two, that's so much easier when you have a nucleus that's back and knows what the coaching staff expects. It makes it so much easier in year two. Doesn't mean easier to win games, just means easier to run a practice and have guys all on the same page.
I'm sure everybody would love to have a roster full of elite defensive players like Davion Mitchell's. That just doesn't exist. But what is required, DP, to have a good, solid team defense? Because you don't necessarily need 12 to 15 guys that are all defensive specialists to have a good team defense, right?
No, I don't. I think the communication and the connection on that side of the floor is key. Am I communicating where I am defensively so that you guarding the ball knows where your help's coming from? Are we connected on the weak side? That if you do get beat, there's rotations there. And so that comes the more cohesive your team is. And I think that negates any lack of athleticism, lack of length you may have, is if you're connected and communicate on that side of the floor, especially defensively.
When you're trying to teach team defense, do you put more on the plates of guys that you feel can handle it? For example, maybe with the Kings, like you can put more on the plate of De'Aaron Fox and Davion Mitchell is really solid on-ball defenders of what's expected of them. But no disrespect to like a Malik Monk or Kevin Huerter, they're more known for the offensive side of the floor. Maybe you kind of simplify it to them of this is your rotation or this is your job. Do you give different players a amount or specific amount of work or task that they have to do based upon what you think they can handle? Or do you try and keep it simple and universal across the board of this is what everybody's job is, where everybody's supposed to be, go out there and execute?
Yeah, I would stress it's probably more universal. Just the game's so interchangeable. There's so much switching going on, especially late clock. There's like-sized guys. And so as long as you know what consistent with what your rotations are, I think that makes it easier. Like to give one person or one player an out makes it hard, and I think if you see the elite teams, they're rotating, they're in sync. When you talk about Murray, like he's come from college to playing major minutes in the NBA. You just saw the jump he made in some league. I think he can be a really good help defender with his length, his arms, his IQ. You're talking about year 2 for somebody like him. That's got potential to be an all-star later down the track. I think, they're headed in the right direction in terms of that. But their team defense or anyone's team defense, I think needs to be consistent and universal, especially at that level.
As you know, so much of basketball and really so much our world is what have you done for me lately, right? And there's not always a lot of patience for things. And you've worked with a ton of NBA players. You're going to work with more NBA players here within the FIBA World Cup in Australia. Even these are the best basketball players in the world, and they study the game and take care of their bodies. It still takes an appropriate amount of time, right, for them to implement these changes and for them to really become comfortable. In your opinion, with the average basketball player, but at that elite level, like how much time do you think is appropriate? You just mentioned like Mike Brown has had a year to kind of implement the offense. Now he's going to try and add defense to it. How much time is appropriate for those outside of the game who aren't in there seeing the work every day to expect changes to happen or expect a player or a group to start to really get it and embrace it?
Yeah, look, I think it takes 2 to 3 years to really get your fingerprint on any organization, whether it's college, whether it's NBA. It's very hard to just go from middle of the pack to first or last to the middle of the pack. There's stages that happen. Otherwise, would all be winning championships if that was the case. But you see the longevity of the success of the Warriors. Their team's been in place for a long time. Their coaching staff has pretty much been in cohesion the whole time. So they've had the same message for a long time. So I think there needs to be patience from a fan standpoint at any level when you're taking over an organization, a team, but you want to see that growth. You don't want to see the same mistakes happening in year 2 that you did in year 1. Maybe the offense takes a little dip because the defense gets better. Maybe there's less possessions because you're better transition defense. The game's not getting up and down. So if the scoring drops and the defense picks up, maybe that's a good thing. So I think there needs to be patience for any fan that's watching a new coach and organization in place. But I think it's natural, especially for somebody like Mike. He's a great coach, got a great staff that team will make even more strides this year than they did last year.
Today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, take a swing at betting MLB on FanDuel, and you can get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets up to $200. That's right. All you have to do is bet $20 that first bet, and you'll land $200 in bonus bets whether you win or you lose. So you either cash in on that first bet right away and you're already in the green, you're already in the money, and you can use those bonus bets to get further in the money. Or if you lose, look at that as an insurance policy. You can get your money back and still make money on top of that with the bonus bets that you will get from FanDuel. That's $200 that you can spend betting on anything and everything from the money line to the over-under or to who you think is going to hit the first home run of the game, all on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you can get paid instantly. There's no better place than to bet on the MLB than FanDuel. So do that right now. When NFL season starts, bet on that. And of course, when the NBA season comes around, bet on FanDuel as well, America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, the official partner of Major League Baseball. Is it always, Coach, a give and take? Like when you're focusing on one area, you kind of have to take away or just live with the results or the consequences on another area? And at what point do you say, okay, we're sacrificing too much on the offensive end with this focus on defense, or vice versa? Is there like a line that you say we can't let it affect what we do this much, even though we're trying to improve in this area? It's changing who we are as a team.
Yeah, I think so. I think you got to be true to who you are. I think you got to be true that I think the Kings are known for playing with pace after year one, and make or miss, they're flying it up the floor. I don't think now in year one and year two to change. I'm not in their coaching locker, but I can't imagine them saying, okay, we'll walk it up and let's slow the tempo down. I don't think that's because I think you got to stay true to who you are, whatever that may be. Even our stuff as we go into training camp with the national team, we have, Josh Giddey and Dyson Daniels and Patty Mills. Like we're going to play fast, and try to get that ball at the floor. And that's who we are as a country. We're not going to go into camp and try to slow things down. So I expect that to be the same for the Kings, and obviously tweak. I think if I talk about our national team, we weren't great rebounding at the Olympics, and we got bronze medal. If we can just get a little bit better rebounding, get a little bit better taking care of the ball, maybe that bronze turns to silver and hopefully gold. And so my guess is Mike is doing the same thing over there at Kings camp when they start up.
What about like individual player workloads? Like I'm thinking of De'Aaron Fox, right? And the incredible season that he had as a fourth quarter scorer, winning clutch player of the year. And I still think there's an even further level that he can go where he's flirting with 30 points a night. And if he can consistently go into the fourth quarter already with 19, 20 points and then have that explosion, I mean, the Kings are probably winning a lot of basketball games. But De'Aaron also took on the challenge of typically guarding the team's best player, especially if it was a guard, towards the end of games, and had a lot of success. I thought he had a breakout year also on the defensive end. I imagine it's hard to put together, whether he's playing 35 minutes, 40 minutes, whatever it is, maximum effort on both ends of the floor the entire time, especially if you want to play as much as you can during the regular season and set yourself up for a deep playoff and potentially even championship run. So when you're working with players and you're trying to preach that balance, you have a really good offensive player that you want to keep their tank as fresh as possible so they can do what they do on the offensive end of the floor. What is your kind of approach or philosophy do you ever have to hold them back in certain areas, or like not necessarily take a play off, but okay, now this is the point of the game where you attack a ball handler aggressively, and this is a point of the game maybe where you back off a little bit and reserve that energy?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for me, we only have a 30-game season, right? And so I can crank it up for 30 games. I don't have the I don't say the luxury, because I don't know if it's a luxury, but those guys are playing 82, 90 games. And I think you have to pick your spots. Like, are you going to go full out for 48 minutes? And they're playing 48-minute games. And so I think that's two different games in that world. Like from a college standpoint, I really don't let my guys take a playoff. They can take a playoff next to me, but I'm not, I have 30 games. They play 1 or 2 games a week if they're lucky. Those guys, De'Aaron's playing 3 games a week, sometimes 4 games a week, different animal. But I think how the game's refereed makes a difference. I think the team you're playing, if it's a physical game early in November, early in December, do you want him beat up so he's not fresh come playoff time? I think you have to take those things into account, as you have these star players on your roster.
Speaking of physicality, I'm glad you brought that up, because the physicality in the playoffs picked up, and I think a lot of people were concerned that would bother the Kings, especially offensively, because they hadn't been there before. And to some extent it did. We didn't see the shooting that we were used to from the regular season with the Kings. The Warriors did a good job holding the Kings well below their 116 points per game average, or whatever it was. But on the defensive end of the floor, Sacramento seemed to really benefit from that. Their defense looked a lot better. I thought they did a really good job playing defense against the Golden State Warriors, because the physicality at that level, they were allowed to play a little bit more aggressive without fouling. This is a weird question, because I feel like it could be painted in a light that gets coaches in trouble, and that's not what I'm necessarily trying to do. But when you're trying to improve defensively, Is there an expectation of, like, when we're trying to be more aggressive and we're trying to implement these things, the officiating probably is not going to be on our side until this is consistently who we become, until we start doing this every night and officials know this is just how we play. Like,
Mhm.
they're gonna hurt us a little bit with the whistle if we're trying to hand check and we're trying to cut off passing lanes and jump in front of ball handlers and things like that, draw charges as much as possible. Like, is that realistic, or am I just trying to justify the the amount of whistles that are going against the Kings right now?
No, I think there's a reality there, and I don't want to talk on the on the Kings per se, but if you're not a physical team by nature, put it this way: if you're a physical team by nature, they kind of let you get away with bumping and holding and because they're not going to blow the whistle every game, because referees watch film like we do before games, and they know what teams finesse and what teams physical and vice versa. I don't care what level you're at, and so. Even for us, from a college standpoint, we're trying to become more physical. Yeah, we want to defend without fouling, but with that, you can't let the offensive team go where they want to willy-nilly. And same with when you watch the Miami Heat play, and I keep going back to them, they've always been physical, and so that game's going to be a pounded type game, and so the referees may let them get away with more than they may, a finesse team. And so I think that's kind of you kind of develop a reputation of being a physical or a finesse team, and you got to kind of meet that happy medium to be really good.
How do you teach or allow physicality in practice? I know it's not like an NFL training camp where they have days with pads and days without pads, and the quarterbacks are like, you cannot touch this guy, protect him at all costs type thing. I imagine you want a certain level of physicality in practice if you want to play as a physical team. You don't want to practice one way and then expect to play another way. But you also want to try and protect your guys as much as possible. How do you balance that? Whether it's a 30-game season, 82-game season, like how do you balance that as a coach?
I think it's easier to ramp it up and pull it back, if that makes sense. Like, let them be physical early, then you can pull them off, let them be less physical. I think it's hard to be less physical and all of a sudden say, let's be physical now. I think I think you got to go the other way. And some of it's who you are as a player. Matt Dellavedova is physical. He is what he is. With the King, that when he comes in the game, you're probably going to get elbowed somewhere. Draymond Green's physical when he plays, whether we like him or don't like him. Like, he's a physical type player. That's not the case for every player out there. I coach Patty Mills. Patty's not coming in the game hitting people. He's coming in the game hitting people with threes. And so there's a good balance there. So some of it's who you are as a player, and some of it's how you allow your players to play in training camp or in practice that then translates into the game.
You mentioned earlier that you sat in on training camps last season. I remember that very well. I hope you get the opportunity to do that again this season. Based off of what you saw last season and how well Mike Brown and his coaching staff, what do you expect to see in training camp this year? They don't let us peek behind the curtain too much like you guys do. We usually get scrimmages at the end, and I'm more interested in looking at like what lineups are together, what combination of players are together. I'm always fascinated with that. But in terms of the drills that we're not going to see and the things that Mike Brown and his staff are going to be preaching and running, what would you expect to see if you were invited to a training camp day for this year?
Look, I just know last year, because to be honest, I haven't asked Mike. I just know last year, the first day of training camp, the guys were, he had them running the lane, and they might have been on Twitter. You guys might have saw it on Twitter. And then he got out there in camp and said, "This isn't how you run the lane." And he got out and sprinted the sideline. And that was like the first or second day of camp. And so that kind of morphed itself into the season of how hard those guys ran. And so whatever Mike and his staff feel like the tone needs to be set, because I don't want to second guess what they're going to come back into camp trying to do. I think you'll see it taking place, because that first day of camp of how hard they ran and how hard he expected them to run was obviously went into play the whole year. And so, I don't know all their analytics of where they think they need to get better at versus where not, but whatever it is, you best believe it's going to be showing up there at the Golden One come October.
I envy your experiences. I don't necessarily envy your sleep schedule with balancing Sac State coaching life with the FIBA World Cup and being a part of the Australian coaching staff. But Keegan Murray just got invited to be on the USA select team, and he's going to get an opportunity to work and practice with the main roster. And even if he doesn't, I mean, honestly, selfishly, if I'm being honest, DP, like I would love for him to get as much experience as possible without stepping on the floor to play a game, because I want him as fresh and as healthy as possible for the Kings season. Again, that's selfish on my part. I want Keegan to have the best experience for him. But I mean, you're in those practices. You're in an international team practice with the best players from the country. How much do you think a young player like Keegan, even if it's just for a week or two, can learn and just soak from being in that environment?
Look, I think the one word that we talked about is the physicality at the World Cup level or at the international level is so much different than in the NBA. The no illegal defense, the hitting the ball off the rim, the being able to chuck cutters. Like, my guess is at USA camp, they get those guys prepared for what they're going to see, come the World Cup. And so those experiences of going against, the best players in America day to day, will not only help him, but also the physicality of those practices will, and then, it's a unique team environment because it's the one situation where you are playing for the name on the front of your chest, which is USA. For us, it's Australia. It's not for the endorsements. It's not for the name on the back. And so that environment gets cranked up to another level when you represent your country. And so I think the experience will be great for Keegan. I know it's great for me and our players that come to camp, and hopefully they come back and he's better for it here with the Kings.
As a coach, what does being a part of a national team, what does that do for you and do for your career? Like Mike Brown had a lot of success with Nigeria. Now, of course, Coach of the Year in Sacramento. Jordi Fernandez took over Nick Nurse's spot with Team Canada. Yourself working with Australia. Like there's a lot of Sacramento ties to this FIBA World Cup in terms of coaching staff. Like how does that elevate you? Is it does it draw attention to you and your coaching style, or is it more about just learning? Like how are you approaching the FIBA World Cup from a coach perspective?
You know what? I think it's a bit of both. Like I change hats. Obviously I'm fully invested in Sac State and everything we have going here. But for that month that I'm with the national team, you're focusing on our nation and our team, and with that you learn so much when you're going against the Serbias, the Finlands, the Germanys of the world, because basketball in Europe is very progressive. I think a lot of the stuff we still hear in the U.S. is from the European teams because they play the game so much differently than we do because of the different rules. And so I learn a lot on both sides of the ball from that in terms of trends. And then the culture and the connection that we all talk about. We all talk about team, but that in itself really is an environment where you're together, not chartering, and at least we're not chartering, in hotel rooms with that group of guys that take away their, Josh Giddey doesn't worry about OKC anymore. He worries about Australia, and that environment and seeing them fight for their nation is special. And some, a lot of stuff I can steal and bring back here at Sac State.
You've worked with Josh Giddey before, haven't you?
Yeah, he's been in camp before. Unfortunately, we cut him before too. So that's that might have been a mistake, but I think he was better for it, and it was pre his draft. So
a mistake or proper motivation. Well, either way, you just said he's not really worried about OKC, but I'm worried about OKC, DP. I'm looking at that team. I'm looking at that roster. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is broken out. Chet Holmgren is hopefully going to be healthy. Lou Dort with the defense that he plays. Plus, they have a treasure trove of draft picks that they can use to improve their roster as well. Like I'm looking at that OKC team and I'm seeing, hey, just how the Kings had a breakout year last season. I can see that happening with them. But since you know Giddey and since you know Australian basketball really well, do you have any? Do you pay close attention to OKC and what are you expecting from Giddey and that group this season?
Well, I do, because I came from University of Oklahoma, so I kind of followed them a lot when I was there. I think I have 4 former players. I have Giddey, Jalen Williams, Kenrich Williams, and Isaiah Joe all on that team. So I kind of watched them from afar, but they are young. They're exciting. I think Giddey is a unique player because he's so big at 6'8" and can really, really pass that ball. I think his shooting's come on, and probably an all-star in the making. When you talk about Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who's already an all-star, I think that 1-2 punch with the Chet Holmgren, a healthy one, gives them a dynamic team. They remind me of what the Kings were last year in terms of their youth and making a push. Just hopefully they don't push over our Kings here.
Well, all right, let's talk some Sac State hoops a little bit, because as is the way of college basketball, there's always roster turnover. You're going into your second season, so maybe you can settle in a little bit more. Like what should we expect from Sac State hoops? Because you had a really solid season, despite all of the challenges of taking over a program. Really solid season. I know you're not anyone to be complacent. You're ready to build upon it. You're ready to win right away. So what's next for Sac State basketball?
Look, I think our goals to finish in the top 4 in the league, and I think we can. Our free agency, which is called the transfer portal, was good to us. I have 11 new guys on my roster, 11 out of 15. So you're talking about a new roster, but guys that have come in with experience from Utah State, Santa Clara, Tulsa. So we have some Power 5 and successful players coming in our program. The unique thing about our situation here is we have 9 international players from all around the globe, and so the guys that have played at the FIBA level and guys that have played in college. And so when you couple that with the returners we have and the local kids that we have coming on our roster, I think it could be an exciting time here for us. We'll play a lot faster. We had Callum McRae, who was 7'1", 280. So we couldn't play as fast as the Kings played. We don't have that anymore. So I hope it's to get up and down more and play more of an up and down style of basketball. So exciting times here for us here at Sac State with our team and with our new president here.
You just talked about it a little bit, but maybe you can go into a little more detail for those who, just hoop fanatics in Sacramento. And I know we got a lot of them here, and the Kings can't play every night, so sometimes we need to get that hoop fix elsewhere. Sac State's a great place to go. Like, what's the Sac State Hornets brand of basketball? Like, what do you want this team to be? If this team were making a tournament run and being broken down on ESPN, what would you want to see the bullet points or the points being made by talking heads like me that think we know what the hell we're talking about?
Yeah, that will be top 10 in the country rebounding. We're an elite defensive team, and our defense leads to our offense. And those 3 things are easier said than done. But with our size, last year we were top 20 in the country rebounding, so that was good. Now, can we get those stops and get out and run and get easy buckets, whether that be threes or layups? So you'll definitely see a tough team. I thought we showed flashes of that last year of playing with a toughness, but I think on the offensive end we'll be a lot more dynamic. But it'll start with defense and rebounding for us.
I got to cover a number of your games last season, and you always treated me to a lot of dramatics. I think I made a joke with you about your flair for the dramatic every time I was there, with overtime games and buzzer beaters and game winners. Great for me and great for storytelling. And one of the games that I went to, of course, Mike Brown and De'Aaron Fox and his family were sitting courtside. I know that was pretty cool for your players to be able to perform in front of them. I believe Zach Chappelle shared with us that Fox spoke with the guys a little bit, and then if I saw correctly on Twitter, Fox recently went and worked with your guys a little bit. To have not just a head coach that you have a friend, but to have the biggest star in the city, who is now elevated himself to one of the biggest stars in the league, or is well on that path, to have him want to be involved in your program and share what he knows. Like, what does that mean to you? And then what do you think that means to basketball? Because to me, that suggests that De'Aaron Fox is a really good ambassador for the game, that he wants to help teach the game and be a part of the game growing in his new community here in Sacramento, outside of just putting the Kings back on the map.
No, I think, De'Aaron to me has always been selfless. He's never been bigger than because I've known him since high school and had the luxury to recruit him. Otherwise, he didn't come play for me. But he's always been the same guy, and so for him to reach out and ask me when we're playing open gym, to not only come once, but to come back multiple times, just speaks to who he is. And I talked about playing fast. We put the shot clock to 22 seconds, or at least they were playing with 22-second shot clock or something in the gym. And he said, next time I come back, it's still too slow. I want to play faster. And so for him to tell our guys about how he wants to play and hear it from a different voice, and get critiqued by an all-star was huge. And the icing on the cake for me came where he wanted some gear for Sac State to wear around. I'm like, man, you're not going to wear that. You're a Kentucky guy. He's like, no, I'm a Sac guy. And so that just means so much to me and so much to even his family. Brought his family, means so much to our program because we support him. We support the Kings. We support Fox. But to have him in your backyard, taking time out of his day to really work, not go through the motions. But my team, we're not allowed to watch, said that he went at him. Just means a lot for us and shows what kind of guy he is.
So you've seen what De'Aaron is, or who De'Aaron can be, kind of as a coach and a teacher. And Keegan Murray shared with us that he spent basically every day this offseason working with Fox. And then the first glimpses we got of Keegan Murray in the California Classic were 29 points and 41 points. So not just Keegan Murray, but how good of a teacher and a coach is De'Aaron, and how much better do guys get from working with him?
I just don't think he's got a half speed in him. I think he's, everything's 100%, no matter what he's doing, and so I think if you're working with that to try to keep up with him is tough, and I think he's got a great balance in terms of how he balances his family, his wife, and then his approach to the game. You don't see him do too much extracurricular stuff. He's so focused and driven on being the best father he can be and best athlete he can be. And so it shows up. I think when you're around that all the time, it naturally rubs off on you. My guess is that's what's happened with Keegan, over this period of time in the offseason.
When your guys are working with him, is there an element of maybe them being starstruck or, oh my God, I'm playing with De'Aaron Fox? Or does that wear off quickly and it's just two hoopers going against each other? And I don't care if this guy's an all-star. I want to beat him or I want to hang.
You know what? So he texted me after the first day. I don't want to share too much, but he texted me and said, let your guys know when I come back, I bleed the same way they do. So which tells me that they weren't really going at him the next day. I think there was a little bit more going at him, and so that's not, for him to say that, I'm sure there was, an all-star walks in the gym. I didn't tell the guys he was coming. It can take you aback for a minute, but then for him to say that and then come back the next day and compete against him was huge.
I won't ask anymore. I'll let what happens between Fox and Sac State stay between Fox and Sac State. I'll let him keep those secrets over there. But the last thing I'll ask you, DP, is you're now ingrained into Sacramento. You're ingrained into, obviously, Sac State. You're ingrained into the Sacramento basketball scene. I know you had heard a lot of good things about Sacramento when I spoke with you the first time. It was before your first season, and kind of still you'd moved and you were getting ready and getting comfortable. What is this community now to you, and just this city is a basketball city? Like, what do you have to say, or have your perspective changed at all now that you've been here for a year? Like, what do you think and feel and tell others about Sacramento?
Look, obviously, I think it's an amazing city to raise a family and to live in. I didn't understand how much of a sporting town it was, especially basketball. I felt like wherever you go, when the Kings do well, or the business was doing well, everybody was happy. But the way people embrace myself, my student athletes, the Kings, it's very refreshing. And I've lived from New York City to Southern California to Australia, but this place is special in the sense that there's no real pretentious people around here. Everybody's engaging, accepting, and everybody was brought on a visit here as basically committed to come to school here, and so it speaks dividends about what kind of city, what kind of place this is, and I'm hoping I'm here for a long time, and we just love it here in Sacramento.
Well, I also think that commitment rate speaks dividends to you and your coaching staff and what you're trying to build here. So it's been a pleasure getting to know you over the last year. Looking forward to many more years of that. Looking forward to stealing your time here on the podcast and getting your 2 cents as a successful college head coach in the future. Hopefully I'll see you at training camp when that starts. Safe travels to Australia. Enjoy the FIBA World Cup. We'll be paying attention to that as well. And I always appreciate your time, DP. So thank you.
Thanks, Matt, as always, bro.
Big thank you again to DP, David Patrick, making time for this interview right before or in between working at Sac State, trying to get some sleep and getting ready for the FIBA World Cup. He's just an incredible man and an incredible coach, and it's an absolute pleasure to have him on. He was always willing to do it. And if you're looking for some reason to pay attention to the FIBA World Cup and a team to root for, in addition to Team USA, hey, bring Australia. Plus, we're already rooting for Canada too, right? So you can root for multiple countries. We're rooting for Canada with Jordi Fernandez. We can root for Australia because of David Patrick. And then when those two teams play Team USA, we can root for both of them to lose. Hey, except for you know what I mean? We want USA to win. We want Canada and Australia to lose, but just that one time. Any other game, we would love for the two of them to be successful because of the members of those coaching staffs. But I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you learned a lot, not just about how the Kings can improve defensively, but a little bit about who De'Aaron Fox is as a person and the work that he's put in with Sac State. I thought that was really cool there at the end, and I appreciate DP for sharing that. But I hope you enjoyed this little 2-part mini series talking to a couple college coaches about how the Kings can improve defensively. If you have thoughts on how the Kings can improve defensively, you have any comments or anything like that, feel free to share them with me. You can do that on Twitter at MattGeorgeSac, or X as it's called now, whatever the hell. Screw you, Elon Musk. It's Twitter, and it forever will be Twitter. You can email me, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com, or if you're watching on YouTube, feel free to leave your thoughts in the YouTube comment section down below. Have yourself a great rest of the day. Can't wait to see you on the next episode of Locked On Kings. Until then, you have been listening to the Locked On Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.